The Vikings were now transgender. Did you know? Do you know why? They found one woman with a sword.
Oh, not this canard again.
Yes.
Oh, for goodness sake.
But you'll see why this has come back up. But this was in 2017. They found it was in fact an old grave that was found on the settlement of Birka on the island of Björkö in Uppland in Sweden. And this was known as the first urban centre of Sweden.
Wow.
So it was founded in 750 AD and supported a population of maybe up to 1,000 inhabitants for a few hundred years until the location moved.
Wait, that's an urban centre?
It is in
AD 750?
Dark Ages Sweden.
Oh, that must have been a chilly time to live.
Yeah, but Sweden gets more sun than you'd expect, actually.
Okay.
So it's actually in the summer in Sweden is quite pleasant. But anyway, and so around the perimeters of the site, there are lots of cemeteries containing some 3,000 mounds, burial mounds, and 1,100 of these graves have been excavated. And so this is, it's an old settlement. There are lots of people buried there, and so you would think that we would have lots of good data. And we do, in a way. But one of the burials investigated by this one chap called Hjalmar Stolpe was recognized even at the time, and this was in the 19th century, the end of the 19th century he did this, of being of an unusual character. And he said this was the most remarkable of all the graves in the field. It was an underground wooden chamber. A body had been interred, dressed in clothing with details evoking the fashions of the Eurasian steppe. 2 horses, one of which was bridled for riding, had been arranged on a platform on the chamber's edge, and the deceased individual was surrounded by a large number of weapons. A bag of gaming pieces was placed on their lap, and a gaming board was propped up beside them, as if they were playing a game of, I don't know, whatever the ancient...
Neftafel.
Whatever it was. But I don't
Probably
know.
tough.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's a cool game. Check it out.
But the interesting thing is they're dressed as a steppe nomad. Steppe nomads often, they use their horses, they fire bows from horseback. This has been a very ancient and well-tested form of warfare that lasted until the invention of the gun. It was awful as well. But it's interesting how this Eurasian steppe nomad, what appears to be, I couldn't find any actual DNA evidence that connected them to the Eurasian steppe, but if they are buried with a bunch of horses in the Eurasian manner, wearing Eurasian clothing, I think it's fair to make the assumption. But anyway, so this is very interesting, this warrior. And of course, because it was a warrior, it appeared to be a warrior, it was assumed that it was a man. The individual's clothing was analysed, and this apparently led them to come to the conclusion that it was a cavalry commander under the immediate command authority of some other royal war leader. The tasseled cap they had was unusual. It was manufactured in Kiev, they think, and typically made for high-status people. So you can see that there was a lot of contact with the Eurasian steppe by people in this time period, and they moved a lot. People seem to think that people in the Middle Ages just sat in a village and never went anywhere. It says no, that's not true. There were massive movements of people all throughout human history, to be honest. And so they assumed it was a man, obviously, because why wouldn't you? But genetic analysis, a new kind of genetic analysis is based on the sequencing the enamel of their teeth, has revealed that it was a person with 2 XX chromosomes. My God, let's break out the queer theory, because this has turned everything on its head. So the assumption that it was a man, of course, was just natural, because we have lots of other graves in which people are buried with their sorts of male and female adornments. And so the weapons being male ones, you actually assume that's a man, and the genetic testing tends to bear that out, and the other ones for the females. But this was normal, but this turned out to be a woman, so who knows? So they say, of course, they say things like this. Queer theory provides a potentially fruitful means of engaging with this individual, and their sense of self may have been, in our terms, non-binary or gender fluid. These are not our terms. Identity may have been something to negotiate, to choose and re-choose on a daily basis. They may have been transgender.
Queer theory is not a fruitful means of engaging with anything.
I agree.
And that is, oh my goodness, that's just nonsense.
I know, as if this person's like, well, sorry, you've got to choose my right pronouns, and as if there haven't been women leaders as well, especially in steppe nomads in particular. This is where the Greeks got their legends of the Amazon, because life on the steppe is not fun. And it turns out that everyone has to be a warrior, so you don't get to just not. But anyway, they do say, though, we strongly believe that interpretation of all burials must be undertaken with care, and that we should be naturally cautious in assuming the items buried with the dead represent their own possessions or reflect their activities in life. Of course, because this could be symbolic. This could be a person who, through blood and heredity, had assumed a position that it was, the lord or whatever, and so you have to have this sword, you have to have this equipment, even if you personally don't use it. And there are other examples of like disabled people who are buried with the same things, but no one thinks that this disabled person is on a battlefield swinging an axe. But it's reflects their status in life. And they point out that this is crucially important relating to gender, which has long been identified as a problematic aspect of funerary archaeology, because you simply don't know.
Well, how about gender was invented in the 20th century, so anything before the 20th century can't be gender related? How about that, huh?
That is a great point. And one they don't bring up.
No, they don't, do they? Because that would undermine the narrative.
That would undermine the queer theory applied to this. And so, in their opinion, though, this was the grave of a woman who lived as a professional warrior and was buried in a martial environment as an individual of rank. And that might be true. That's absolutely might be true. One. There are thousands of graves that have been unearthed. And we have unearthed tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of bodies from ancient history all over the world.
Yep.
I mean, there are at least 1,000 found in Pompeii alone, for example.
Right.
We've got like thousands in Britain. We've found gladiators. We've found this. We've found that. We have actually got quite an interesting and detailed cross section of people living in all of human history. And one is a woman in a grave with a sword. Okay. How does History Channel represent this?
Oh, no.
DNA suggests Viking women were powerful warriors. This looks like it wasn't a Viking woman, right? It looks like it's a Eurasian woman, right?
Yeah.
B, it was one. C, you don't know that she wasn't just buried with this as an honorific. Like, this is not what this suggests. But this is in 2019, and this was going from the Birka grave. But they do point out this is the first Viking grave to contain both weapons and female remains.
Ooh.
How might female remains end up in a grave with weapons? Slaves, that's right. They were buried as slaves. This is an ancient Scandinavian funeral custom where they would literally bury they'd kill the slaves and put them in the grave with the master. And the slaves, of course, were often female.
That sounds like a barbaric custom.
Yes, it was
that's
a barbaric
literally
custom.
well, it's sooty, isn't it, in a way?
Yes, and it's awful, obviously. But that's what they did back in like the 9th century in Scandinavia because they were barbarians. But it's not to say there aren't other graves that are of high status women, but they are just buried with female-oriented accompaniments. And this whole thing has been sparked. This whole segment was sparked by this Times article. Sunday Times, quote, Viking hordes may have been trans.
Well, to be fair, in terms of their destructive impact on Western civilization,
Disavow.
I'm thinking of the ideologues here.
Good save. But that is just staggering, isn't it? Now, like if somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 Vikings came over in the Great Heathen Army, I mean, it was well chronicled by the English because they were ravaging their country. No mention
Didn't
of it.
mention anything about them having blue hair and
No,
nothing about that.
No mention of women posing as men or men posing as women.
No, they didn't bring longboats full of hormone supplements, did they? That wasn't in the.
It just
the
wasn't
Anglo-Saxon
recorded.
Chronicle.
No, and it doesn't show up in the archaeology either.
The Venerable Bede is so unreliable.
He is, yeah. The way he characterizes it is just Northmen. So we assume they're men from the north. But we didn't check their genitals or ask their pronouns. But this is just the most staggering article in the world, and I thought it'd be fun to go through. Viking hordes may have been trans. It's just transgender warriors were among the Vikings who ransacked Scotland more than 1,000 years ago, a leading historian, quote unquote, believes. Sasha Coward, who specializes in gender...
That cannot be a real name.
That's a real name.
Such a Coward is a real name.
Basically,
No
yeah.
way.
Sacha, I think it is, a Sasha.
Okay.
Sasha Coward, but it does sound like such a coward, who specializes in gender and sexuality. Ah, yes, here we go. Here we go. Said it would be a mistake to believe that Viking society subscribed to traditional gender roles after recent discovery suggested that some celebrated warriors were female. That one. The one example is the one in Birka. That's the example.
Oh,
right?
dear.
And we have dozens of others where it's women buried with female ornaments. One where they're buried with the sword and say, that's it. Got them. They're all trans. They're all trans. I knew it. And yes, I do happen to be a specialist in gender and sexuality, just so you know. She says, the stories you hear of fierce, hot-blooded warrior men of violence and pillage, the notion can make it hard for us to look at the 8th to 11th centuries in Scotland without a strong cisgender and heterosexual bias.
Good.
And I guess the people writing at the time had a strong cisgender and heterosexual bias. It can be a challenge to see the roles of gender non-conforming people, to pull apart the understanding of gender, sex, and identity as they really were for the people we now call the Vikings. How much queer theory do you think there was in Sweden in the 9th century?
I'm going to go with hard 0.
I love this.
It sounds like some low-key nonsense to me, if you ask me.
Absolutely. This is unbelievable. And it's so obviously the imposition of modern ideology on the past.
Yeah. It's like the Marxist historians who look at like Bronze Age history and say, oh, yes, of course, the Hittites were communist or some ludicrous assertion. Like that.
It's got to be about resource distribution. It's
Yeah.
it's not about the way they thought of the gods or anything. Anyway, at the very least, men and women in Viking society could break from traditional constructs of male and female roles. And it is possible that we are talking about people who today would identify as transgender or non-binary.
Fortunately, they weren't born today, luckily for them, so they didn't have the choice.
And of course, the one example given for this is the 10th century burial site at Birka, which was excavated over 100 years ago, and one of them was confirmed to be, assumed to belong to a high status female warrior. Now that we've genetically tested it. Again, we don't know that. The authors of the study who conducted it were like, we're not saying that's the case. But Neil Price, professor for archaeology at the University of Uppsala, Sweden, had previously observed that the female Viking may have been transgender. Why couldn't she have just been a woman who was a warrior from the Eurasian steppes, where you actually did get warrior women? She's wearing all this Eurasian stuff. She's got a couple of horses. Like, Vikings not known for their horses, known for their shield walls and their boats. It's like she looks like an immigrant. Why not go with the immigrant aspect? Look at this successful immigrant who integrated into Viking society. Female empowerment, mass migration, good. No, now we've gone to the transgender narrative.
But also, this is an extremely sexist transgender narrative because according to feminist theory,
She's not a woman.
Well, yeah.
She's a man.
Well, no, according to feminist theory, I would say that women can dress however they like, don't you know? And it reveals nothing about their sexuality if they want to go around swinging swords and things.
That's absolutely true. But according to intersectional theory, if she dresses like a man, she's a man, regardless of what the biology says. So now the woman has actually...
Hang on, a drag queen's female now, according to intersectional theory.
Well, they're inferring the identity, I assume, of the thing. But that means that essentially this wasn't a woman. And so what they're saying is, if trans men are men, then this was a man, then there's nothing incongruent about any of this. And women lose out again, according to intersectional theory. But anyway, they say, we know the gender identity of the person in the Norse period was often tied to their role in Viking society, not just the biology they were born with. Do we know that?
No.
No, I don't think we know that.
Just imposing that modern ideological assertion on history.
Well, that's exactly what Coward goes on to say. Queer theory is an important part of archaeology and can help us understand the complexity and diversity of past societies. Man, just keep reaching. Right. Also, they're all gay.
Oh, right. Okay.
Because, why not? Let's just go for this one as well. This is another recent one. So in 2009 in Modena, Italy, construction workers dug up a grave with 2 skeletons in it that were holding hands. Proof positive that this was, it was assumed that it was a man and a woman. And and so they were called the lovers, right? Because you assume that was the case. And they did a DNA test on them through the same process. And it turned out that they were both male. And it's like, right, okay, well then they must be gay. It's like, oh, so, I mean, they were buried together.
That's a little... Yeah.
The people burying them had made them hold hands. They didn't die holding hands. But the thing is, that's not necessarily true. I mean, does that make Saudi Arabian men gay?
Right, exactly.
Because they wander around holding hands. Which, I mean, don't get me wrong, I think it's a bit sus. But
it happens in India as well.
But the point is
cultural practice.
Exactly. But the point is, this is once again, and the thing is, I'm not even saying they're not gay. You know, I think it's probably likely that they were, but we don't know, and that's the point, isn't it? Mm-hmm. The whole thing here. We actually don't know any of these things, and what we are doing is projecting our ideological preferences backwards through the past. Mm-hmm. And so, who knows? You know, it could be this 5th century Italian men were gay. Could be. Might be. Mm-hmm. So what? You know, we don't know. But they, of course, had made this very clear that they want it to be the case. And so, yeah, basically a lot of archaeology is now being perverted by modern ideology, as you might have expected.
Mm-hmm. If you enjoyed that segment from the podcast, The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the articles that we do, such as this one from John Wheatley on reading the future of propaganda. And there is, of course, a silver and gold tier audio track if you prefer to listen instead of reading. But if you also want to follow John, you can also follow him on Getter at John Wheatley. Thank you and goodbye.